All right, everyone, thank you for your patience as we have got our connectivity lined up. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Board Policy Committee meeting, and we will start with our roll call. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam President. President Taylor.
I'm here.
Trustee Smith.
Here.
Trustee Rodriguez.
Here.
Trustee Nicolette.
Here.
I am here. Trustee Mayberry.
I'm here.
Trustee Church.
Here.
All right. We have a quorum, Madam President.
All right, thank you very much, Madam Clerk. And let me just say, just because it's our first meeting with no mask, it's good to see everybody's faces.
I love it.
All right, let's go ahead and jump right into our agenda. We're going to go down to agenda item 2.01. This is looking for a motion to approve the Policy Committee minutes from our January 18th meeting, if that is the pleasure of the board.
So
All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. Okay, down to agenda item 2.02. This is a discussion and possible action to recommend revisions to and/or for the proposed revisions of Board Policy 50. And again, just as a reminder to everyone, if we approve here with changes or not with changes, whatever it goes on, because we're meeting as the Board Policy Committee, it will then be forwarded to the full board for preliminary approval, and then once approved, should it get approved at that level, go out for a 13-day public comment period, and then coming back to the board for final approval. So just a little review. And before us, we see Dr. Lamarca all the time, but welcome, Deletion Crane. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you. It's been a while. President Taylor, Superintendent McNeil, members of the board, I'm Deletion Crane. I'm the administrator for the Department of Family School Partnerships. And I work with many other departments in our district to implement family engagement, including Mary Stock from our Title I department, who's in the audience today, and our partners in early childhood education. Did I steal your thunder? So as you can see, we've had a family engagement policy in Washoe County School District for the last 20 years and are required by the Elementary and Secondary Education Act to have that policy. The changes that we're recommending are really minor edits in alignment with legal's guidelines for board policies. And also to bring our policy in alignment with the State Board of Education's policies.
Okay. Are there any in particular you want to point out to our attention?
Just the state did adopt a definition for family engagement, and that's in the opening paragraph in the first sentence. And through the recommendations from our legal department, we've removed some of the language in the first paragraph that is more of an opening statement instead of really a purpose statement. And then we've added alignment with also the federal dual capacity framework for family school partnerships, which is based on 5 decades of research on how to implement effective family engagement.
Okay. Thank you very much. I mean, that looks like the major changes. Let's bring it back here. Any public comment on this one, Jeannie? No public comment. Thank you. Let's bring it back here to the table. Questions, comments, observations from the board? Trustee Church, looks like you're first as usual.
As usual, I looked around a little. A couple questions. I really liked the initial current policy. The board believes that family engagement is essential for academic achievement and everything that goes with it. Am I missing it, or is that not found anywhere in the new one, anywhere in there? I mean, that's just an opinion. And then I do have a question. Are family members, being parent, guardian, allowed to or encouraged to, by any regulation, policy, et cetera, to visit classrooms and sit in on their students' classrooms?
I think that we would take that on an individual basis. We welcome families, although that has been challenging during COVID with the spread. I think all of our building administrators would take those requests on an individual basis, especially in the current context.
And obviously, COVID aside, we're assuming that's hopefully going to go away and nothing like it will follow.
I'll just
Trustee
jump
Chair,
in
I was
there.
just going to say, I think she wants to respond. I know you, so that we can just take it and move, you know what I mean, and kind of close, you know what I'm talking about. Ask the superintendent to comment on that question specifically about visits to classrooms. That's where you're getting, right?
Right, so
Okay.
that's actually, as you know, covered in our visitor policy as well, too. So we also have that in our visitor policy. But as Ms. Crane was saying, it's also at the individual schools and what the principals feel is going to be appropriate for their particular school at that point in time. But visitors are covered under the visitors policy.
So they are encouraged, if that's part of your question? I want to make sure, I'm sorry I don't miss it.
Yeah,
Trustee Church?
I'm actually, I'd like to make a motion, but I'll make a comment first. Under section A4, which doesn't exist yet.
Okay, what page? Just let us, so we can catch up with you. Is that page 2?
Yes, on my page, yes, page 2, it goes A1, 2, 3, so it would be, or 1, 2, so this would actually be 3. I think that we should have a section that family members are encouraged to visit the students' schools as much as practicable, or that's a legal word, but practical, either way, shall be allowed to sit in on the student, and shall be allowed to sit in on the student classes. That's for discussion, that's on our motion.
Okay, why don't we pause there before we get to a motion? So you're looking at, I want to make sure I'm following you, sir. 1, is it under 1A4? Because it looks like the enumeration, because that C was deleted, correct?
Yeah.
So how should the enumeration go then, counsel?
Yeah, it looks like there was sometimes when these track changes happen, the numbers get a little off. So, and we missed this one, to be frank, but I think it's 1, 2, I believe C should be 3, and that's why it restarted at 1, 2, 3. So it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. That's what I thought, because I wanted to make sure with his,
Yeah.
you're suggesting then it would be 7.
It would be, I guess, number 6. It would be at the end.
It would be 7. C should be 3
Yeah,
according
7,
to council.
right. Yeah, the
Anyway,
way that-
somewhere in there, I just wanted to make
Somewhere
it
in
clear.
here. Yep.
So what you're saying is we should put in here a statement that says families and family members are encouraged to attend class. That's the bottom line.
As much as practical or practicable, both words, interchangeable.
Okay, comments from the board. Clerk Manetto?
Thank you, Madam President. Is that kind of verbiage in the policy you were just mentioning?
Visitors policy.
Yeah, and it also talks about, yes, Trustee Minetto, and it also talks about ways in which families can be encouraged, but then also, we also need to be very cognizant of the learning environment that's happening so that it's not disruptive to our classrooms as well, too.
Yeah, please. Council has something he can read on that. Is that to help respond to your comment? Please.
I don't know if this helps, but the purpose statement of Board Policy 1505, visitors to district property. The Board of Trustees welcomes and encourages visits by parents, guardians, and other members of the community to Washoe County School District schools, classrooms, and sanctioned or recognized programs, events, and field trips, recognizing the benefit of these partnerships to the academic success of students. This board policy seeks to achieve a balance between the potential benefits associated with the presence of visitors at district properties and programs, events, while avoiding disruption to the educational process and protecting the safety and welfare of students and employees, as well as district's facilities and equipment from misuse or vandalism. So I think that answers the question. I'm not sure.
Surely does. Thank you.
And we
Thank you,
do
Counsel.
have schools that do that on a regular basis. So for instance, Desert Heights, out in the back of Stead. They have a program called Dads of Great Students, and the principal meets with different families on a daily basis, and those parental figures are invited into classrooms and see instruction and connect with kids, and so we do have some very structured programs at some of our schools for that.
Thank you very much. Then go Trustee Rodriguez, so just barely beat you to it, then back to you, Trustee Church.
Well, I'm ready to make a motion. I looked at this earlier, and I know there's policies that reference this in the visitors and whatnot. So I do move that the Board Policy Committee, let me start over. I move that the Board Policy Committee recommends the forwarding proposed revision of Board Policy 5200, Family Engagement, to a future meeting of the Board of Trustees for consideration for preliminary approval.
Is there a second? Then we can go back to you for, well, thank you. There's a second. Moved by Trustee Rodriguez, seconded by Clerk Manello. Now, then I can go back for your continued comment. You okay? All right. All right. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposition? All right. The motion's carried. Thank you very much. I think I like that. It was very clearly stated in the visitors policy that we want families and parents to visit, because I think that is an important message. All right. Thank you for all your work. I know it's been challenging during COVID, but it's so important. So thank you, Lisa.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Good to see you, too. You guys don't know how much of a rock star she is in our family engagement. We've gotten some national recognition for her work. So just saying. All right. Agenda item 2.03, discussion and possible action to recommend revisions to and/or for the proposed revisions of Board Policy 5625. This is student health and welfare, specifically to update formatting, clarify language, and reflect current practice to a future meeting of the Board of Trustees for consideration of preliminary approval. Of course, this is for action. And now Jennifer Crane is not here. I'm like, okay, no, not here. That's a different Crane. I was like, oh, it's another Crane, but different. All right. Dr. LaMarca.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor,
Thank you.
President Taylor, Superintendent McNeil. For the record, Paul LaMarca, Chief Strategies Officer. Jennifer will probably get here. She got detained. We're still in the middle of a pandemic, and so she's a little busy. But I'm going to try to help us get through this. Board Policy 5625 has very limited formatting changes. I do think it's worth stating, I believe this policy first originated in 2009, so this is not a new policy at all. Through track changes, you can see where we've made changes, and there's very few of them. I think probably the most substantive change in the entire document is requiring the superintendent to adopt regulation, as before it was permissive and it was a may. So I don't have a lot more to say about the policy changes themselves. Again, they're formatting primarily, but be certainly open to answering any questions you might have.
Thank you, Dr. LaMarca. I want to get to, we all received a lot of emails on this of concern. I'm like, let's just get right to it. I know that you've seen some of those and are prepared to share some information. Let's talk about it, please, because if that's of a concern, we want to have a conversation about it. So please, if you would, fill us in on the on the assertion that this allows the superintendent some authority that I believe belongs with the state, but let's see what's there and then make sure if there are questions, the board members need to be clear on that as well.
Okay, thank you, and I'll try and respond. And if someone has any direct question, that might be helpful. We received a couple of questions from a news media outlet yesterday, and we responded to those, and they were along those lines. There was, will this policy require COVID vaccinations? Does this policy change exemptions regarding vaccinations? And the answers to that are no. We don't, as a school district, based on my knowledge, we've never, as a school district, mandated vaccinations. The state mandates vaccinations. The Washington County Health District has the authority to do that. If those entities were to do that, I'm not sure we have the authority to say we're not going to do that. But at this point, COVID vaccinations are not a mandate, and reading the tea leaves, I don't think they are, but it's not, this board policy was not written relative to COVID. This was one of many board policies that you've seen changed because of formatting. There's no there's no purpose to change any of the exemptions. We have folks that are exempt from vaccinations because of religious beliefs, medical exemptions, and that applies to the state mandated vaccinations, and I don't see any change there. I have seen a flyer that was circulating. I don't know where that originated. It talked about today's meeting being about providing the superintendent the authority to mandate COVID vaccinations. I think she was as astonished about that as I was. So that is certainly not the intent of this particular policy.
And then if I may just follow up on that, and then I'll get to you, Dr. Nicolette, because that was going to be the next question that I asked. So it's really clear that it doesn't require COVID vaccinations or anything like that, any other vaccination or anything like that, because she's the superintendent. The superintendent really, the authority that it gives the superintendent is basically, you're going to have some vaccines are mandated. We already know that by state law and so on. And you make sure that it's coordinated, that it's managed and whatnot, just as which happens right now. When students register, they have to have a vaccination record and so on. That's under the purview of running the day-to-day of the district. I mean, that's right. And so what the question I want to have is for sure, does it in any way, shape, or form? So it's clear that that's what it is. Not that she's saying we know it doesn't say that that she is going to say, yes, we have vaccinations. Does it open a door for the superintendent all of a sudden one day saying, oh, I want to require a vaccination for hoof and mouth disease?
I do not believe that it does. No, my reading of it does not allow that authority. This policy is as relevant to how a nurse or clinical aide would treat a child who fell from a jungle gym and broke their arm as it has any relationship to vaccinations, as it has any relationship to a kid that's got, boogery nose. So no, it is not designed for that.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to really get down to, because there's a lot of angst. I saw a flyer as well. We're probably talking about the same one that made those assertions, and I'm like, I didn't see that in here.
No.
Right? It's like, but I want to make sure I'm not missing that. Right? Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Nicolette.
Yes, thank you. To take it a step further, I think it would be helpful to dig a little deeper into administrative regulations and why they exist and how do you put those together. A superintendent doesn't go in their office, close the door, and write something, and now everybody has to do it. So maybe if you could just kind of address the why and how you do that.
I think council's going to take that, if that's okay, Dr. Nicolette.
Yeah, so the regulations are the how. The policy is followed by the district. So you set the policy. This is why we're doing what we're doing. And then the superintendent is directed on the how. And so she is going to pass a regulation with support from Dr. LaMarca, me, and his experts that he has, Jennifer, et cetera. And then we'll review it. We'll give it to her to sign. And that's how the district carries out these policies. So the reg is always a how, and the reg can never exceed what's written in the policy. If it does, the policy preempts it. And I think another important point to point out in this circumstances, which is why I've asked to field this question, is this is a Dillon's Law state. So unless the state tells us we can do something as a school district, we can't do it. So, unless the state passes a law that says you must have hoof and mouth disease.
I was trying to get away from COVID.
Yeah, right. Hoof and mouth
That's all that came
disease,
to
to
mind.
use your example of vaccine, we can't do it. And that's or boogery noses for that matter. But anyway, you get the point. So I think there's a lot of things to consider here, and it's just a complete misreading of the intent of this and a complete misreading to suggest otherwise, frankly.
And further, in my mind, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Council or Dr. LaMarca, not only is it a misreading or misinterpretation or whatever the case may be, it's actually contrary to what the law allows.
Absolutely.
So it's not just, well, another board can come here and say, hey, but that really, nope, the law doesn't allow that because of what you just explained, the Dillon's Law state. So the law so it doesn't matter who's in these chairs, who's in this chair, the law does not allow that. And so that was much ado about nothing is what it sounds like.
I think it was an example of misinformation being spread. We've heard a lot about that these days, and I think that was a good example of that.
Okay. Questions, comments, Trustee Church?
Yeah, I'm one of the ones that misread it, and I don't think I misread it. I think that it's vague, and we clarified some things today, and so I have a few notes, and I'll start at the beginning. If that's true that we follow state law, that ought to be in here. It's for people to read it and know there ought to be a section that says we will follow the state law. The second thing is it states the board delegates to the superintendent.
Will you wait, sir, where you're reading so we can follow?
Policy number 1, policy 1.
Policy 1?
It says policy number 1.
May I interject really quick, Mr. Church, just for clarification, because this was true of the previous policy as well. So the visitors policy was an associated document. So within legal requirements and associated documents, you will see that this board policy complies with Nevada revised statutes and Nevada Administrative Code. It provides the sections. So this policy does explicitly state we follow state law.
I saw that before I commented, but I think it doesn't need to be at the bottom. I think it needs to be in the body. But so the next question, and this is new to me, what I'm hearing from legal, if we have a flu outbreak in Washoe County and the superintendent says, we're going to require flu shots this year for all students, what I'm hearing from legal is she or he does not have that authority.
Correct.
I think that ought to be in here. Secondly, or thirdly, again, it states policy number 1, through the board policy, the board delegates to the superintendent or designee. That troubles me. I don't think I misread it. I think I read it right. I don't think it's misinformation. I think that it's a concern to the person reading this. I'm educated. I can read. And so it's not misinformation. It's how we interpret it, which we've clarified much of that today, and that's why it should be in here. But this was written 2009 or whatever, before COVID or anything else. To me, reading this, it makes me very nervous to delegate important tasks like that. Now, we've clarified it, that the board superintendent, the superintendent does not have that authority, but in reading it, I think that it's not clear. Then, under the regulation, and I know the answer to this, but just to clarify, the regulation never comes back to the board. The regulation's implemented on this. And so, for example, under the religious exemption, as long as it doesn't exceed the policy, the superintendent will make his or her regulation, never comes back to the board, and then we're stuck with it. And I have a concern with that, especially under religious and medical exemptions. I don't see anything in here for an appeal process. Yeah. I don't see anything in here for a review. I think it delegates too much to the superintendent, and I'm trying not to talk too much, but this is just so important, moving forward, that I have major concerns with that, that there's an appeal, something like that, and that we maybe at least address if there's any other opt-out, other than medical and religious. I just don't want my kid to have smallpox. Is there an opt-out option? So I think that clarifies my concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Church, and Ms. Crane may want to comment.
Welcome, Ms. Crane. We know you were on your way here. Welcome.
Let me say a couple of things, because I hear what you're saying. I do, and I understand there are some things you wish were in different positions or included. The district is enormously complex. This area of healthcare is enormously complex. That's why this professional runs this operation. And I think that the board policy is basically the tool of the board to empower her to take on these complex tasks for the district so that the district remains in compliance with state law. When it comes to things like the exemptions, the way I look at that, and Mr. Rombardo can tell me if I'm wrong, What I think he said is the superintendent couldn't say, nope, in this district we don't do exemptions, because the law carries that there are exemptions. It also can't allow, unless the law allows that, for the superintendent to say, well, it's okay if you're Catholic, but not if you're Protestant. It doesn't make those kinds of distinctions. That would be further restriction than the law provides. So I get that sometimes these documents can be confusing, but this is what empowers us to do what's necessary relative to the law. And then I'll be quiet.
Thank you, Dr. Lamarca. What I'd like to do, I know oh, you go ahead.
Well, I want to move on to another issue, number F, policy 1F. Can you tell me about the counseling? What is counseling, and who makes the decisions, and are the parents notified? Can they opt out?
I can tell you that one. We just had a big presentation on counseling. Was it last meeting or the meeting before? No therapeutic counseling happens without parental consent. We just had a big presentation on that. And I believe we asked very direct questions regarding that, and it was very clear. No, I mean, a kid gets your counseling because you're going to get your classes and stuff. That happens in the school, but no therapeutic counseling happens without parental consent. So that doesn't change.
I guess the question would be, should we put that in there?
It's you know what? It's totally up to the board. Can do whatever we like to do. I felt comfortable with it at that meeting. In terms of that, but again, the board can do whatever it is that we like to do. Was there another comment? Because I want to get to public comment. I know people emailed in, and doesn't mean we don't get to continue conversation. But I typically will go to public comment first.
Unless there's a support, I just think we ought to put some of the wording in that I discussed. I'm not going to make a motion because I think it would fall flat. But again,
your mic's going on in and out.
I think we should have some of that stuff in there to clarify for the reading public that, for example, the superintendent shall not establish any policies beyond that of state law, that kind of a thing. I'm not going to make a motion because I don't think it's going to go anywhere, but I'm just putting that out there.
Okay. Thank you very much. So why don't we go to public comment? We can bring it back here to the table. And then if there are any recommendations, Trustee Church, then if there are any of the comments you said, you know how I always say, where would you like to put it? What would you like to say? Any of that you'd like to get to, we'll get to that so that can be considered. Please.
There's no in-person public comment, but you received emails from Carol Feinberg, Darla Lee, Steve York, and Susan Allen.
Okay, thank you very much. And then we know those are public comment emails. We know we got plenty of other emails that came directly to the board in terms of that. And one thing I would just say in this is the policy is not going to completely detail the how, because the policy is not for the how. And I think part of our responsibility as trustees is to understand that. And when we're asked, because we will get asked, right? And when we're asked is to say, hey, here's this regulation. It can't exceed the law. I mean, there's just more to it because it is incredibly complex. If we put everything in our policies, the policies would be way too prohibitive, way too large. And we've worked really hard to do things like refer to laws and statutes when they're applicable, so that we don't have to actually write it in the policy. But again, as a board, we can put whatever we want to in here. And I think it's important that we all understand what the superintendent has been delegated to do. We delegate the day-to-day running of the district. This is a part of the day-to-day running of the district. But again, if we want to we can make anything more restrictive if we like. So, open for that at this time. If there are any recommendations for any of those, any recommendation to put anything anywhere, Trustee Church, or I don't want to close that door until you've had an opportunity.
At a bare minimum, under policy number 1, just about one sentence here. Through board policy, the board delegates to the superintendent or designee, comma, within state and federal law, comma, to establish and then implement, blah, blah, blah. And I'll make that as a motion.
Okay. There's a motion on the floor that statement be added, and number 1 above. Is there a second to the motion? Okay, don't see a second. I think just for information, I think that's a signal that it's written below and that we feel pretty comfortable with that. And if we're asked, we can certainly direct people and should. I mean, it's important for us to know this stuff. And if we have questions, get clarified, and then we can answer some of those questions that are out there. And I think we can serve our people better if we do that, because I think a lot of people got a lot of angst over something that's not here. And that took a lot of people a lot of trouble. A lot of people were bothered a lot, and we can just provide the accurate information, get the clarity.
I'll make one more motion, then I'll move on.
I'm sorry, I was in the middle of a sentence.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Come on now, Trustee Church. It's all right. I think we can do a job of serving our constituents and helping them understand. So we can all get there together, because them understanding, I think, is important. Please go ahead, Trustee Church. Apology accepted.
My apologies. I'm
apology
sorry.
accepted.
I was reading ahead, and my fault. Let me make sure I get this right. Under G, policy.
The one that scratched out, or
Yeah, the one that scratched out,
Okay.
replacing that. Family, I forget, we use the term family, I guess. We don't use parent guardian anymore.
we use family.
Family members shall have the option to opt out of these provisions as may be authorized by law. That's a motion.
Okay. There's an option to add a G on there. I don't see a second, Trustee Church. Again, I think that it's the comfort level is that it's in the law, not because it isn't important, but that it's already there. Yeah, I think it's important to make sure it's clear. It's not because it isn't important. It is, but those things are there. Okay. Trustee Mayberry?
Thank you, Madam President. Just a clarifying question for a parent. Other than immunization fairs and some of these COVID pods that we've done over the last year, does the school district administer immunizations?
Trustee Mayberry, no, we don't administer the immunizations. We do provide clinics where the health department comes in and administers immunizations, and we do it that way. We do not administer them ourselves.
Thank you, Trustee Mayberry. Trustee Rodriguez?
And just to confirm, that's with parents' consent or guardians' consent.
Absolutely, it is done with parent consent.
Thank you. Madam President, I'd like to make a motion.
Okay, please.
I move that the Board Policy Committee recommends the forwarding proposed revision of Board Policy 5625, student health and welfare, to a future meeting of the Board of Trustees for consideration of preliminary approval.
I'll second that.
There's a motion on the floor from Trustee Rodriguez, a second from Trustee Mayberry. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Opposition?
Nay.
Okay, the motion carries. Let the record show it is 6-1. Thank you very much, and thank you, Ms. Crane, for rushing to get here. We know you were delayed. We appreciate it. Okay, on to agenda item 2.04. Discussion and possible action to recommend revisions to and/or for the proposed revisions of Board Policy 5450, release of students specifically to update formatting and clarify language to a future regular meeting of the Board of Trustees for consideration of preliminary approval. And before us, we see two area superintendents extraordinaire. Dr. Paul and Ms. Curtis, welcome.
Good afternoon, President Taylor, Superintendent McNeil, Board of Trustees. For the record, I am Mike Paul, Area 3 Superintendent.
And I am Gina Curtis, Area 2 Area Superintendent, and we are doing the buddy system today.
All right.
Okay, so we have Board Policy 5450, and it is basically the release of students, so releasing students during the school day or school-related activities to look at updates for that. Basically, this is minor edits, formatting changes, looking to remove some references to other policies and regulations. The last time that it was reviewed for changes, April 2019. So nothing really in the content, just some basic minor edits and formatting changes. So that is what we have to look for today.
Okay. So since there's no really content changes, there's nothing really to draw our attention to, just to align the format.
Yeah, basically formatting changes and some minor editing, yes.
Okay. Okay. We'll see if we have any public comment on this, Jeannie.
There's no public comment.
None on that one. Okay. Thank you very much. We'll bring it here to the board, to the table. Looks like we're dealing primarily with editorial and formatting changes, but please, any discussion, questions? Dr. Nicolette?
Welcome. Thank you. This is important, release of students. Oh, yeah. So I guess our activities, sponsored, sanctioned, or recognized activities, are they considered within the school hours? And I ask that question because of the first statement, the very first statement, where it says, Students are supervised and attend instruction during school hours. And the only reason I ask is because I want to make sure that this purpose is clear, that if students are with us, activities and class time, we are responsible for appropriate and safe release of our students.
During the school day, right, is first and foremost within this. When you look at school-sponsored activities, what I would say during this part of it is like a field trip. So if a student needs to leave a field trip early, a parent is authorized to come. A parent has to be there to pick up the student, releasing them from a field trip during the day if they are not on school campus, those kinds of things. Is that basically what you're referring to?
Yeah, that did clarify it. So it does not mean after-school activities, clubs and football and choir.
So district-sponsored events is what it stands for. So for athletics, that's a district-sponsored event, and the release would have to be approved by the coach. For example, if the family wanted to take the student home rather than riding the bus, there has to be some type of conversation or note with the parent and the coach or whoever's in charge of the bus, whether it's an administrator or a coach. Does that
I
make sense?
would assume that, yes, absolutely.
Yes.
So back to my original question, students are supervised and attend instruction during school hours. So really, it's kind of more than during the school hours of the day. And I only ask that because it seems a little more, as I read further, it seems a little more broad than the actual school hours. So school hours by definition are?
So with this, after school hours, if there is a district-sponsored event within a certain time frame, like what Ms. Curtis was talking about, if an athletic team or an event is going to travel somewhere to participate in an event, and it is the expectation that that group travels back to the school to be released, and a guardian or a parent is taking that student from that event and not returning back, then there needs to be a release with that guardian from that event, and the student cannot just walk away and leave with anyone. So there has to be that release during that event, so the coach or the advisor or someone knows where that student is going. So that is the release of student here with this. So if it is a school-sponsored event within a certain time frame that people know where that student is supposed to be, there needs to be a process in place so the student is released appropriately to the appropriate guardian or family member.
If I may, because I think I know where you're getting, this might be helpful. I think what you're saying is this opening statement talks about during the school day. However, the policy extends to hours that are beyond the school day. Is that where your question is coming from?
Yes, and if that final, I know I'm nitpicking, but safety, we all know that's so important. That second from the last, the limitations on release of students during school hours, and does that and reflect what you just said, Area Superintendent Paul?
Yes.
So that is how it would be interpreted in the
Yes.
administrative regulations.
Yes.
Okay.
The details around
I'm good,
that.
thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Other questions, comments on this policy? Trustee Church?
Yeah, I won't hold this up. Just a really quick comment, and nothing to address really today, but I have so many concerns with the many, many policies, and I just don't see why this couldn't be incorporated under student attendance. That said, it's not worth holding it up today, but we just have so many policies, and it just would seem to be fit right. I mean, it's even referenced at the end of this policy, student attendance. So just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Church. Other comments, suggestions, questions? Otherwise, looking for a motion for approval, if that's the pleasure of the board. Trustee Smith?
I'm ready to make a motion.
Okay.
I move that the Board Policy Committee recommends forwarding the proposed revision of Board Policy, am I reading the right one? 5625?
Nope.
Nope.
It's 5450. Oh.
I wasn't keeping up with my check marks. Okay. I move that the Board Policy Committee recommends forwarding the proposed revisions of Board Policy 5450, release of students, to a future meeting of the Board of Trustees for consideration of preliminary approval.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor and a second. I believe we already had public comment. There was none. All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Opposition? Okay, the motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. Thanks to both of you. No, good clarifications. All this is good clarifications. I mean, it really has been. Discussion, agenda item 2.05. Discussion and possible action to recommend revisions to and/or for the proposed revision of Board Policy 5700, safe and respectful learning environment, specifically to update formatting and clarify language to a future regular meeting of the Board of Trustees for consideration of preliminary approval. And the presenter on this is Chief General Counsel, Mr. Rombardo.
Good afternoon, everyone. So this is our Board Policy 5700 related to safe and respectful learning environment. This is required by state law. This is what came about via the new, well, it's no longer new, but the bullying law that was adopted approximately 6 years ago. And basically, this was cleaned up by our office. We did have to add a definition by law for race discrimination, so that was added in here on paragraph 3, which if you look at the board is highlighted in kind of a light blue color. And then beyond that, we just rotated around this language that I'm now highlighting in the light blue color on the board from down below. So it's really not a change. We just moved it because it read better that way, we felt. And beyond that, and you'll see here's the other language that was moved. And beyond that, there's not really a lot of substantive changes, some renumbering to create consistency. And I know some of the trustees may not have been here when we started this process, and I know you've heard a lot today about renumbering, so let me just address that quickly. Then when the Office of General Counsel took this over and we adopted a new board policy on the formatting of board policies, all of the old policies were out of context with the new ones. So every policy is going to, at a minimum, have numbering changes. So that's a lot of the things you're seeing here. We did remove investigation procedures from paragraph 5 down here. We've adopted a regulation related there too. I'm highlighting
Where's that,
it on the
Counsel?
board again, right there.
All right, thank you.
Yep. And then I think that sums it up. Beyond that, we would just ask that you please feel free to make any changes you desire. Otherwise, pass the motion, pass this policy through so that we can get it on the books.
Okay, thank you, Counsel. Trustee Mayberry?
Thank you, Madam President. The only question I have is the hazing definition seems to be struck in. I'm sure, can you clarify why that was the case on the top of page 3?
Does everyone see where he's reading?
That is a good question.
I didn't even catch that.
And I have to harken back to my memory on this. Let me ask our civil rights coordinator. Do you have any other questions? I don't recall, and I don't want to make something up.
Yeah, no, sir. I just noticed it. I thought maybe it was stricken because there's somewhere else noted in there, and I couldn't find it. It seems important. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's my recollection it wasn't part of the bullying definition for safe and respectful learning environment.
From the state?
Yeah, but let me double check that, and I'll contact Gina, and then we'll have an answer before the meeting, before this item concludes. I'm just going to send her a text right now.
Thank you, sir.
So it sounds as though what council thinks, and I hear the superintendent as well, that the district went to the definition that's being utilized by the state, and then their updated definition they deleted that. They didn't have the hazing part on there, and that's how that happened here. So we'll verify, and it doesn't mean that we can't say, hey, we think that's important. We'd like something to be considered in there, right? If we think it's excluded and it's important. So that he'll get a response for it. Let's see if there are any other questions or comments on this in the meantime. Oh. Okay, well, she's reading it right now. So any public comment on this one, Jeannie?
There's no public comment.
Okay. Oh, no, it's good. No, it's a good catch. It's a good catch. I mean, that's why we show up and read these and don't just check the box, right? They have some conversation. We certainly don't want to give the impression that it isn't important. We certainly know that. Why don't we do this? Can we table and go? Oh, go ahead, Dr. Nicolette.
You know, thank you for clarifying that part of this reframing is because of law. But I will say I'm just a little troubled. I mean, discrimination in general should just not be allowed. I understand the race discrimination, absolutely, positively. There are other kinds of discrimination. And it worries me that we're not a little more broad in that in here. And quite frankly, I really liked the harassment, discrimination, intimidation, violence, and violent behavior. I liked that reference. Then again, you know, maybe it's too much, but again, I will say, I would like a little more clarity on the fact that any kinds of discrimination will not be tolerated.
Okay, council's reading, so let's pause for a moment.
Yeah. So with regard to the race discrimination, I agree with your point. However, this was adopted in the last legislative session, that you have to have bullying related to race discrimination. It was specific to that. However, if you look at the definition, it means any single or repeated or pervasive act or acts, whether targeted to a specific person or targeted in general to any demographic regarding the race, color, culture, religion, language, ethnicity, or national origin of a person. So, albeit stating race discrimination, it actually includes religion, language, ethnicity, and national origin. I appreciate that there's also gender discrimination, things of that nature, but we enforce those anyway. That's part of the bullying statute. This was what was required by the new change in the NRS. So bullying has expanded, if you will. With regard to hazing, we deleted that for, Gina just texted me, that's a crime that was cited before, NRS 200.605. We're not talking about crimes here. This is bullying. Bullying includes hazing in it, but this hazing is something that is different than bullying, if that makes sense. So this is actually, under NRS 200.605, is a misdemeanor, and if it results in substantial bodily harm, it's a gross misdemeanor. Well, bullying is not that, and we want to be careful about blending those definitions together, because one is law enforcement, and that requires a higher standard to prosecute that matter, so that would be beyond a reasonable doubt. One is an administrative function, which is preponderance of the evidence, much lower standard. So this is like 51% to 49%, and this is no reasonable person would disagree, 80% to 20%, something like that, if that makes sense. Sometimes it helps to quantify it. So that's why we're recommending that deletion.
That covered that for you, Trustee Mayberry? In terms of discrimination on this, in reading the broad, is interesting that it said race discrimination, but it's much broader when you read all the lines in it, right? One thing that jumps out, though, gender is not on here, though. Is that correct elsewhere?
It's non-gender conforming.
Yeah, it's not on here, and that's because of the state law, the way it was adopted.
Oh.
So there's more parts to the state law now, and we, you know, I don't want to get the board caught up into politics. As lawyers, we look at this and we were like, why would they even add this? We already had that.
Okay.
But this is
Got
what
it.
they wanted us to add. But we do enforce gender discrimination.
It isn't that, it isn't there, it just isn't here.
Right, exactly. It's just not here in this, because now there's a new provision that just deals with race discrimination under the NRS. If I had my choice,
It would just be one.
it would just be one, but I don't. This is what state law requires. So if you take this one out, we've got a little problem. So I don't know how else to.
Well, I mean, I guess I would say if we're looking at, it's covered in the law, as we deal with our policies earlier, it's the same will apply if it's covered in the law and the reference therein, so. Okay. Again, just don't want to make it seem like it isn't important,
Right.
right? But it is included, it is certainly included, so.
Absolutely.
Good questions, comments. Any further? Otherwise, looking for a motion, if that's the pleasure of my colleagues. Trustee Rodriguez?
Excuse me. Yeah, I move that the Board Policy Committee recommends forwarding the proposed revisions of Board Policy 5700, Safe and Respectful Learning Environment, to the future meeting of the Board of Trustees for consideration, preliminary approval.
Thank you very much. There's a motion. Is there a second? seconded by trustee Manello. The motion was by trustee Rodriguez. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Opposition? Right, the motion carries. Let the record show it too is unanimous. All right, I see Deputy Beiersdorf moving into position. We're into agenda item 2.06, discussion and possible action to recommend revisions to and/or forward the proposed revisions of Board Policy 6000, shared decision-making specifically to update formatting and clarify language to a future regular meeting of the Board of Trustees for consideration of preliminary approval, and Deputy Deborah Beiersdorf is before us.
Oh, good afternoon, Dr. Taylor. Thank you, Dr. McNeil and trustees. Deborah Beiersdorf, Deputy Superintendent. Let's get myself a little organized here. The first policy that I'm bringing to you this afternoon for your consideration is Policy 6000. This particular policy, shared decision-making, defines and describes our district's process for stakeholder participation and input. The most, I think, substantive change to this is actually moving it to under the Office of the Deputy Superintendent. Prior, it was with our Office of School Leadership, and a lot of it does relate, obviously, to schools, but the policy does call out district administration as well, so thought it was appropriate to come over to the Office of the Deputy Superintendent. Again, we have formatting changes we're bringing to you today. It was last revised in April of 2019, and I wanted to share with the trustees as well that I collaborated with our Office of School Leadership, our Office of Academics, and our Office of Accountability as well in bringing these changes to you today. I don't think I have anything else to add, and unless you have questions for me.
Okay, we'll jump in. So nothing specific, as I hear from you, to point out to us. Well, we'll go first to public comment. Jeannie, do we have any?
There's no public comment.
Okay, none for this one. Let's bring it here to the board. Are there any questions, comments? Trustee Church?
I just have one. This is just kind of, why do we have this policy? I just like, is this like a common sense how we work day to day? We have policies on community engagement. Was there any discussion of if we even need this policy?
No, not a discussion that I've had with any of the offices that I mentioned earlier. I guess that would be, for all of you to discuss. And I don't disagree with you, Trustee Church. It's probably true of quite a few of maybe policies and things that we have in place that you would hope would be common sense. But this one does really call out how important it is for our school district to engage with its stakeholders, our community, our families, the work that our principals do on a daily basis, the work I do on a daily basis, the work our superintendent does on a daily basis. That it's to me, it's a statement that we think it's very important that we listen to our community and work closely with them.
Thank you very much. Trustee Smith?
Thank you, President Taylor. So just carrying on to Trustee Church. So I see what you mean. I mean, sometimes we read policies and we go, this feels like something we shouldn't need a policy on because these are things we should be doing. But this is exactly why sometimes it's really important to spell things out, because just earlier in this exact meeting, we talked about possibly adding all these things to it because we want to be more clear. And that's exactly why we need to have policies like this, so that we can point to them and say, this really does matter to us. It matters so much that we have this policy, and we can direct people to it. Because then otherwise information passes around, and it's really up to whoever's communicating what our intent is. But a policy allows us to be clear on it. So I appreciate that we have a policy on this. Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Smith. Other questions, comments? Not looking for a motion if that's the pleasure of the board.
Yeah, okay, I'll go ahead and.
Okay, Trustee Mayberry?
So we are on
2.06. Policy 6000.
Okay, thank you.
Got to keep up with your cross-outs, right, Trustee Smith? I do the same thing.
So I move to the Board Policy Committee recommends forwarding the proposed revisions of Board Policy 6000, shared decision-making, to a future meeting of the Board of Trustees for consideration of preliminary approval.
Second.
There's a motion on the floor from Trustee Mayberry, seconded by Dr. Nicolette. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item. Thank you so much, Deputy Beiersdorf. Oh, you're still here. That's right. Sorry. Next one. Sorry. I didn't mean you're still here. That sounded bad. Oh, you're still here. I didn't mean that. Oh, great. She's still here. That's not what I meant. Sorry. Sorry. Can we scratch that from the tape? Can we scratch that from the video? Sorry. All right. Agenda item 2.07. Discussion and possible action to recommend revisions to and or forward the proposed revisions of Board Policy 6111, school calendars and schedule types to relieve overcrowding, specifically to update formatting and clarify language to a future regular meeting of the Board of Trustees for consideration of preliminary approval. This for possible action. And look who's here.
She's back.
Deputy Beiersdorf.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. So Board Policy 6111 around school calendars and schedule types that the district could implement in order to relieve overcrowding is actually a policy that several of us knew inside and out several years ago. So I was smiling to myself when I went back and reacquainted myself. I said, oh my goodness. However, and it's some trustee church maybe your comment, goodness, is this something that we do still need to have in place given the work that we've done to build new schools and build out school and the things that are happening right now. However, you never know. So the proposed changes for this particular policy are more again around formatting. We also did some key work. I collaborated with the student accounting and facilities and capital projects departments as well on this particular one with Bryn LaPenta and Adam Searcy. So besides the formatting updates, we did add a definition to balanced calendar, which you will have seen is not in the original or current policy. But other than that, there's been no real substantive changes to this one.
Thank you, Beiersdorf. Comment on this one, Jeannie? Okay, thank you. Let's bring it here to the board. If there are any questions, suggestions for change, wise looking for a motion, if that is the pleasure of the board. Seems pretty straightforward. Clerk Manetto?
Sure. Thank you. I don't know if I'm on the right one.
Okay. Just get the number. Just get the policy number right. That's it.
I move the Board Policy Committee recommends forwarding the proposed revisions to Board Policy 6111. It's all those ones. School and schedule types to relieve overcrowding to a future meeting of the Board of Trustees for consideration of preliminary approval.
Second.
Okay, there is a motion on the floor from Clerk Manetto and second from Vice President Nicolette. Seeing no discussion? All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show that it's unanimous. Thank you very much. It's good to get our formatting and get some things cleaned up, so we appreciate it. Okay, Board Policy 2.08, discussion and possible action to recommend revisions to or forward the proposed adoption of Board Policy 4700. This is employee complaint process, specifically to outline the procedures to file an employee complaint for employees not governed by collective bargaining agreements to a future regular meeting of the Board of Trustees for consideration of preliminary approval. And our Chief Human Resources Officer, Ms. Ellison, is before us. Welcome.
Thank you. I'll only be here for one, so don't worry, I won't take them.
Okay.
Emily Ellison, for the record, Chief Human Resources Officer. As President Taylor explained, Board Policy 4700 outlines at the policy level the employee complaint process and provides direction to the superintendent to develop an administrative regulation to correspond with this policy. It's a new policy. We didn't have this policy in place before. Many of our collective bargaining agreements have other provisions for different types of complaints. This one would catch those that aren't covered in collective bargaining agreement, or for those folks who are not covered by a collective bargaining agreement. So pretty straightforward. I am happy to answer any questions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, it looks like we have a couple leaning in. We'll start with Dr. Nicolette. Okay, wait, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Do we have any public comment, Jeannie?
There's no public comment.
Dr. Nicolette? Oh, mic on. Yes.
Thank you. I just want to say that this is my favorite kind of policy, 2 pages. Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nicolette. I also think it's important for those either not involved in the bargaining unit or who are not covered by bargaining union. They need to have a process too, and so I think it's good to have them covered as well. So thank you for that, Trustee Church.
Just 3 things, and I might have missed it.
Should we take them one at a time so we can kind of
Yes.
discuss and
Number 1, should there be something in there that we delegate to the superintendent, the regulation or the policy, the regulation on how to administer this?
I think that's inherent, but let's.
I think maybe I'm not understanding the question, but the last sentence of the first
there it
of
is.
item 1, the superintendent
is.
shall include in the administrative regulation the following provisions. So I think that
Policy, and then you see number 1 under it. I think it's there and
Got it. Missed it.
directs the superintendent right there. Well, you said you may have missed it, so yeah, I missed it too.
Number 2, should we include any reference to the superintendent developing a complaint form or something in here reference a complaint form?
That would probably be taken care of in the regulation as well, as far as the how to do that.
And number 3, I would like to see under confidentiality a comment.
That's C, everybody. Just
Confidentiality policy 1C, page 1, something to the effect of, except as explicitly waived by the complainant. Would you comment on that, your opinion?
Well, we see HR and legal going back and forth, so.
I have to be careful, right? I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to provide legal advice. I think I would want to understand to what end we would be adding that.
What if the complainant wanted it to be public information and didn't want it to be confidential?
Well, I think we have an employee's rights issue, because if employee A is complaining about employee B, the complainant is employee A. Employee B has the right to have it confidential. The analysis out of Don Ray and Bradshaw, DR Partners, says that public employees don't give up their confidentiality just because they're public employees, and so the public's interest is outweighed by the confidentiality of the private employer. So the reason for that and the analysis for that the Nevada Supreme Court gave was that because complainant A's allegation, if it were to go public, immediately presumes that employee B did it, and employee B didn't even get a chance to have a full investigation and have his or her due process rights adhered to. It's immediately a public issue that has just basically convicted, especially with social media now, employee B without that person ever getting their due process rights. So from a legal perspective, we would have a strong issue with waiving that privacy.
That answer that for you? Oh, see, that answer that for you?
No, we've been down this road. There's a number of times we've discussed this ad nauseum, but it does say in compliance with the policies of the district and state and federal laws. So nobody's suggesting we violate any of those, as well as employment contracts. But where individuals, well, so I mean, you could just as well say shall be transparent to the extent possible in compliance with the policies, because again, it all hinges on compliance with state, federal law, and contract. So let me ask a question then. If an employee did release that information, said they filed a complaint against,
employee B,
one janitor complains about the other janitor not cleaning up their portion of the building, and files some kind of complaint, and they go public with it, would they be disciplined?
it's very difficult to comment on hypothetical discipline without the specifics.
Well,
so is there recommended language, and you like to make a motion? So
no, because I'm just going to vote no because I think things should be transparent to the maximum degree possible, not confidential.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Church. It sounds to me like the law prohibits that, so, based upon Supreme Court, Nevada State Supreme Court decision, counsel. So it sounds like it's prohibited by law.
Well, again, nobody's suggesting we violate state, federal law, contract, or policies, but to that degree that it's possible to be transparent, I think we should be. And that, in my opinion, does not violate law to say we'll be transparent to the extent possible, provided we follow the law. But again, I'm not going to beat a dead horse.
I think one of the concerns that I would share from a human resources perspective is the chilling effect that that could have on potential complaints. Because most people don't have an intimate understanding of confidentiality law, and so I think many people would assume that information that they didn't want to be made public would be made public. So I'd be concerned about that from an HR perspective.
Well, I will comment one more time if I might.
Please.
Number one, we've discussed this ad nauseum before in general terms. And again, if you say confidential to the maximum extent possible, it would almost interpret to be, we couldn't even put out a thing saying the complaint was investigated and was founded, or the complaint was investigated and was unfounded, which I think the public or the complainant has a right to know. And again, where parties waive that right, I think they have that right. But by keeping things extremely confidential, I think there's a certain degree that the public has a right to know, especially after the matter is adjudicated.
Okay. I mean, go ahead, counsel.
Well, but the complainant isn't the person waiving the right. The complainant is the person that's complaining about the other person. So, may I use you?
Yes.
So if I'm complaining about Trustee Nicolette, I'm the complainant. She's not waiving it. I'm waiving it for her, that I'm going to reveal this information about her. And that's exactly what you can't do. And that's how you get sued. And I appreciate that you're saying, well, we'll just say to the extent possible by law. And I'm telling you the extent possible is you can't do it. And my fear is that if you read in here that it says an employee can release it, he or she may ignore the part that says to the extent possible by law, and therefore I just waived it for, in my hypothetical, Trustee Nicolette. I don't think that's going to create an issue, because she's going to say, well, you inferred it, district, by putting that language in there, and that's going to result in litigation back at us. But if you all want to put it in there, we can make it work. That's a concern for legal and for HR, I would imagine.
Trustee, thank you, counsel. Trustee Minetto?
Thank you, Madam President. I think these are people we're talking about. And I think it's part of our job to take as good a care of first of all, our children and then our staff as we can, protecting them. And I think confidentiality is about everything to employees.
Thank you, Trustee Minetto. Trustee Church?
I'll try to wrap it up. Again, hypothetically, Dr. Nicolette says, I want to go public with this. I've been accused of this and I'm innocent. And then as I read this, she can't. And I think finally, this permeates so many different policies that we've already talked about. Many of the board members weren't here for those. That just at some point, I'd just love to see a legal synopsis of exactly what we can do and can't do on that. You know, a synopsis. So-and-so, a employee was accused of smoking in the building. It was determined to be founded. Yes or, and again, we're beating a dead horse here, but I would love to see an overall synopsis of, so we know exactly, and I know NRS 288 for law enforcement is totally different than for teachers, but it's a troubling thing to me that I personally want to be as transparent as possible.
Well, I think I appreciate that, Trustee Church. In this case, I think what Trustee Minetto said about we're dealing with people, it's just really important. And one part of that is I also, on the other end, wouldn't want to be chilling to a person who may complain, and now this complaint may go public. And sometimes people, when they complain, they don't want it to go public, right? But it's something that's really important because, it's, whether it's your boss or something like that, I mean, there are a lot of those issues, I think, that will be concerning. And right now, the law doesn't allow us to do anything more than what the policy does from a transparency standpoint. And I'm comfortable with it, just myself. So, Dr. Nicolette?
This hypothetical thing's kind of fun. So, in this case that council shared with us, I still have, the right might be a big word, but I still have the right to share my story. That's correct. And so to me, that's what this is really about. Well, number one, it's about integrity, and it's about honoring and respecting relationships, whether you like a person or not, whether one person messed up and another person's unhappy. It's up to internal departments to work on that. To me, it's not up to the public to make decisions on that. That's an internal, and I have every trust with our administrators and our HR departments and counseling, et cetera, that can be utilized. So technically, I can still share my story. What I would hope is that I would not say, well, that Neil, I would make it be my story. And I think that comes from respect, professional development, training, and having a policy that's very simple that people can feel comfortable with. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Dr. Nicolette. Seeing no further discussion, looking for a motion if that's the,
All I was going
Dr.
to add,
McNeil?
President Taylor, to that point, and I agree with you. I think also, within the ARs, right, the administrative regulations, the process of resolution is missing in the discussion. And so obviously we always want to go to resolution as one of the strategies for conflict, whether that's a complaint process. But resolution is something, that we hold very dear in our school district, that we are able to come to a solution. And then these steps take precedent if we can't do that.
Thank you, Dr. McNeil. Resolution, that's important.
I do have one quick question.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Are board members considered employees?
I think in some cases we are, in some cases we aren't legally.
Till the end. Do we have a legal opinion?
I don't know. I haven't asked you to look it up ahead of time, so I don't.
Yeah, it's hard to opine from here, but
yeah.
I'll say that generally speaking, no, but you can create liability for us if you mistreat employees or harass them or discriminate against them or violate any one of the protected classes in Title 2, 7, 9, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1? That's not real. 2, 7,
we knew
9.
That.
Okay, I was just joking. I can help myself there. So you can create liability for us the same way that an employee can. So it's a kind of a yes and no answer. It just depends on the circumstance.
So let me clarify that, if I might.
I think we're off the item here. This item is about employee complaint process, and now I'm going down giving an opinion about Board of Trustees.
Is this about employee complaints?
Well, yeah, about the definition of employees. I think that's germane to this conversation. And I'm sorry, it just popped into my head as I'm reading it. We know that in the past, citizens have complained against board members, and they were told the voters decide. It's not internal complaint. In this case, it would be either, say, a board member complained against an employee or an employee complained against a board member. My gut is to agree with Mr. Rombardo that an employee cannot complain against a board member because, again, the voters decide.
Yeah, I think that, and I would say that it really depends upon the situation based upon what council said, and to land anything more firm than that, I think would be inappropriate at this point. So
And I just want to be clear, I didn't say that an employee can't complain against a trustee. If you sexually harass an employee, they darn well can.
You said we can create liability.
Right. They can
Exactly,
complain
we
about
can,
you.
yeah.
I never said an employee cannot complain about you.
I heard to create liability. I heard to create liability. I'm sorry, I misheard.
Okay, why does...
Yeah, that's what he means. That's what it means. If we misbehave, that creates liability because an employee can complain and the district is liable. That's what that meant. So.
Regarding board policy 4700, it's rather vague or undecided whether they could complain against a trustee via the complaint process. I guess that's my question.
Yeah, again, I think that would take some looking to see, because as you said, some things came up before and it was looked into, and because that's not considered as a part of this, I wouldn't want to nail down to yes or no. That would be unfair, and we don't want to put inaccurate information out there. But to be clear, we can create liability for the district if we behave badly or inappropriately, and there is a complaint. So to be very clear.
Well,
okay.
And if I may, I just add, in the purpose, it's really very clear to me that if Trustee Diane Nicolette does something, I don't even want to come up with an example, to an employee, it recognizes that at times employees may have legitimate complaints related to their employment. So if I'm being inappropriate with an employee, it relates to their employment, then really therein lies the problem, whether I'm an employee or not.
Right. Yeah, let me add to this that an employer, and this doesn't just apply to school districts, this is a issue for especially public employers, but actually even private employers. An employer has to provide a work environment that's free of unreasonable harassment, unreasonable harassment related to the various protected classes, right? So even if a student acts inappropriately towards a outside this reasonable scope of the employee's, let's say, teacher's position, we have a duty to end that harassment. So I don't think we don't need to look at, I think we're starting to go off on looking at this from the wrong perspective, the person who's complained about, and you need to look at it from the perspective of the complainant. And if the complainant is doing it from his or her employment or related thereto, then they're allowed to complain about anything that's related to their employment. So that, well, not any, obviously if it's unreasonable, we want to look into it, but my point is that's the way you have to look at it. So it can be against a trustee, it can be against a student, it could be against somebody who enters the Welcome Center and, let's say, makes an inappropriate comment regarding somebody's race or something of that nature. That could be a complaint too. So I just want to be clear, it can be about any of those things. I hope that helps.
I appreciate that, Counsel. Let's see what the pleasure of the board is. We're looking for a motion if there are no, Trustee Mayberry?
Yeah, I'll move the Board Policy Committee recommends forwarding the adoption of Board Policy 4700, Employee Complaint Process, to a future meeting of the Board of Trustees for consideration of preliminary approval.
Thank you, Trustee Mayberry.
Second.
Okay. Motion by Trustee Mayberry, seconded by Trustee Rodriguez. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. Thank you very much, Ms. Ellison. All right, agenda item 2.09. Excuse me. Discussion and possible action to direct staff to revise board policy 9110 to address deletion of items from agenda by removing section 2G. And we have it on our email, as well as we have a hard copy that was handed out to each of us as well. And revising section 2J3 to create a process for deleting items from the agenda and or revising the agenda consistent with Nevada's open meeting law. This for possible action. This is, actually, I'm the presenter on this, and it actually began with some questions from Trustee Church regarding agenda item 9110. And when I was speaking with board legal counsel, Counsel Hall, about it, I asked him, hey, take a look and let's see. One, I think it's important, to stay within our policies. And if we're outside the policy, then we either need to change our behavior or change our policy. Those are the only two options we have, not to live outside the policy. As far as I'm concerned, that's my perspective. and then to see what can be done. And just for background, and we all know this, what can be done, because it is important for trustees to have a mechanism, should they desire to do so. It is important for trustees to have a mechanism to say, hey, let's pull something off of the agenda. Of course, the way it should read, in my opinion, is, if someone wants something pulled from the agenda, then there should be a second trustee. If you want something on the agenda, there should be a second trustee for that. And so there should be room for that. And by removing approval of the agenda off of the agenda, as I did, right, I should not have done that. It doesn't say it has to be on there, but it implies that it's there. Okay, and so when we got a chance to have just a second look at that, which is one of the things that, and we mentioned this earlier, that we benefit from by having someone else take a look. It's implied there, so let's just be safe again. And it's nothing in me that ever wants to operate outside of policy. So, in meeting with Council Hall, I asked them, just take a look. One of the areas of concern, as you know, is the agenda item. The form of the agenda item that we've had, and that will be returning to our agendas until we get this changed, by the way, approval of the agenda. So make this very clear. We'll be returning to the agenda until we get this worked out, because otherwise we're operating outside of policy. And it's not okay to operate outside of policy. So you have that clear, Trustee Church? Because you're going to ask me about it after the meeting. I already know.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to listen carefully to everything you said. So let me read back shortly or briefly. We have to follow the policy.
Yep.
You made the decision to remove approval of the agenda. You now recognize or feel that it's best to put it back on.
Yep, just to be absolutely clear, you bet. Yep.
Even though I might point out it's not on today.
Well, because we haven't even had this yet.
And what I'm also saying is the way this was worded, I didn't know exactly what this was about.
Okay.
It's so vaguely worded, we can't be changing anything today.
No, what has to happen from a process standpoint is that we, as a policy committee, because this is out of our order, right? It's out of our thing. So we have to say, yes, we want to pull 9110 so we can take a look at it. Then we can make changes.
But not today.
No, because the agenda item, as you can see from the agenda item, is that so the revisions. What we're asking for the superintendent to make changes so that we can be in compliance with Nevada open meeting law, right? Of course, we know that's not even optional, right? Additionally, it's important that trustees have an opportunity to say, hey, just back to hypothetical, 2 new trustees this time. Trustee Minetto, Trustee Rodriguez say, you know what, I think we should pull that from the agenda. 2 trustees get to say, pull it from the agenda. And what that would mean is then it becomes, so then we actually have a discussion about whether or not we still as a board decide whether we pull it from the agenda. But 2 trustees can pull that up. When I pulled the agenda item, approval of the agenda, that gave nobody an opportunity to say, hey, I got a question about that. Maybe you want to pull it. And that's not what 9110 implies should happen. And that's the spirit of it. It's not spelled out. It's not the letter of it, but it's the spirit of it. And the spirit of the policy matters.
So again, reading that back.
It's okay. No, we're working through it. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm trying to understand. My brain is full today. You're saying that approval of the agenda goes back on, but if a single trustee requests it in the open meeting, the board would then vote yes or no?
No.
Okay.
It has to be 2 trustees have to ask for it.
So as long as 2?
Yeah, it has to. Remember,
at the open meeting?
Yeah, at the meeting.
And if the one trustee doesn't get a second?
Right, then it stays on. Because otherwise, can you imagine somebody is in there having a bad day? Well, then we have trustees pulling stuff off. It's same thing, same rules for getting things on the agenda as getting things off the agenda. That's consistent. But what it does do, and this was a concern, and I shared this with Council Hall, and we all know this. What was happening, as we know, was that was being used as a general public comment period, and part of the concern around that was, hey, that's not a general public comment period. That item really should be about the items that are on the agenda. Do they stay or do they not? Yeah. That's the spirit of this, right? Back to the spirit of this, right? That's the spirit of this. So let's get to the spirit, and if that means we put this thing back on, let's put it back on. It's okay, right? And then we as a board decide that. And again, I do think it's appropriate, and important for trustees to say, hey, you know what? They should have some input on the agenda as well. Putting something on takes 2 people, or pulling something off, right? Then that 2 people can do it. Then we have a discussion. So then as a board, then the majority votes, yes, we should pull this. Then it's off and we deal with it. Well, two people have to, two, one asks for it, someone else says yes, I think that's great, then we deliberate on it and vote. It comes off or not.
Okay, now you confused me a little more. So one person says, I want it off.
Yep.
It doesn't get a second. It
stays on.
It stays. It gets a second.
Then we have to vote on it.
Then we vote on it.
Yes.
Even though that's not stated in the policy, that's the interpretation.
That's what we're going to be considering. We're not approving the policy at all here. Okay. At all. We're not approving the policy at all. So know that. So what happens, right, until 9110 as change, so to speak, comes back, it goes back to what approval of the agenda goes back on the agenda. Starting next week's board meeting. That is no changes at all. The changes that I'm talking about now have to come before this group, right? The policy committee, before any changes are made.
Okay. And then you may be getting to it or not want to get to it, but the same issue on the consent agenda.
On the consent agenda. No, actually, it wasn't on this, but just so you know, I asked Anthony Hall, right, Council Hall, I said, you know what, let's do this. Any of the questions about the agenda, let's get all that worked out. And I shared that with BLT, said, you know what, any of that, if it's consent, okay, fine. If it's public comment period, okay, fine. Then the board can decide how we want to deal with that.
So as of next week, under consent agenda B2, if a debatable item appears on the consent agenda, the item may be removed at the request of the board member and inserted at an appropriate place on the agenda. So am I hearing that that's what would be done?
That's what will be done. Now, what the change I'm asking is that if it be an item that has not already been deliberated, that's not on here. I'll be asking for that to be added. But let's say until the policy is changed? Hold on. Okay, let me take a recess.
What now?
I think I'm getting off the agenda.
Oh.
We can take a recess. All right, everybody. We'll bring everybody back to order. I apologize. No. I apologize. I allowed the conversation in my zeal to, as I said, I want to get through and get some things straight. I think that's important. I allowed us to go too far off of the agenda, which we shouldn't go off the agenda at all. And so, but the intention is let's get some stuff straight. I think that's important to do, and as a board, we decide how we go forward. And so the conversation about the consent agenda was not on the agenda, so I could not have that. I tried, I pushed back a little bit, I lost. It's just he's bigger than me. But at any rate, so what I'm just to be safe, and so it leaves us as we need to have it, so we can take care of things. Is just looking for a motion to ask the superintendent, let me read my page here, to ask the superintendent to direct staff to revise board policy 9110, right, and just to address, to revise policy 9110 and bring it back, and to address the deletion of items from the agenda, period, right, and then bring it back here to the board policy committee. So we're asking for a revision of board policy 9110 to come back here to this, and that will include, better stated, that will include the deletion of items from the agenda. Okay, yes.
So moved.
Trustee Smith, oh, thank you. Okay, Jeannie, you got that again. So the motion is to, let me restate it. The motion is to, it would be that the board policy committee direct the superintendent to make, bring back board policy 9110, with changes to include, addressing the deletion of items from the agenda. Good. Okay, that's a motion and a second, and what that allows us to do is to take care of it, but not get outside of the agenda item. Okay, and in the meantime, we have a motion and a second, so now we're for discussion. Let me clarify one thing. Public comment, too. We have to just do that first.
I don't have any public comment. Could I get who did the second?
Yes, Trustee Rodriguez, I'm sorry. Motion by Trustee Smith, second by Trustee Rodriguez. And what that would, I forgot I was going to say now, dang it. So let's take other comments. Dr. Nicolette, and then Trustee Mayberry. Trustee Church, I think you had your, okay.
That motion clarified actually a question for me. Thank you very much. Because Section 2G and Section 2J3, 2J3 doesn't appear to have anything to do with the direction we want to try and go.
And that's why we left it broad.
Right, okay, great. Mm-hmm. And so if you would, may I hear the motion one more time, please?
I'm sorry, Jeannie, yes, you're the official.
Well, discussion, okay. To direct the superintendent to revise board policy 9110.
To include?
To include creating a process for deleting items from the agenda, but leaving out the specific
period.
parts.
That's it. Yep, yeah. That's exactly it, period.
Okay.
Very good. Good capture. Does that answer your question, Dr. Nicolette?
Yes. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Jeannie.
Thank you, Jeannie. Great job. Trustee Mayberry?
Yeah, I think I'm just going to repeat what's probably been said once or twice already. I mean, this is existing policy. And all we're doing is giving the superintendent direction, as noted,
to revise so that we can, yes. Yep.
And then we can talk more about it at that time.
Mm-hmm. So again, we aren't and by the way, this would also mean that beginning next Tuesday, right, action to adopt the agenda returns to the agenda until this comes back up at a policy meeting and the board decides whatever it is that we do. I wanted to make sure that was clear. Okay? Okay, I'm sorry? Oh, yeah, and the do we adopt the agendas at the work session too? I guess we do, huh? Yep, at the work session. So this returns to the work session is first. That's right, before the board meeting. This returns to all of our agendas as we've had it, and then and we will work on 9110 and work it out. Okay, Trustee Church.
I'm totally confused. On my policy, 2G talks about executive session.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm going to interrupt you, Trustee Church. That's why there are no letters in the motion. There are no letters. Dr. Nicolette just said what you're about to say.
Oh.
Okay, there are no letters in the motion. The motion is to bring back board policy 9110. Okay, with no letters, no 2G, 2J, none of that. Okay, to make sure it's open and all of that, and to bring back revisions that include a process for deleting items from the agenda. So there are no letters. So you don't have to be confused about letters. There are no letters.
Okay. And then in reading the proposed motion, which we didn't do, I noticed you left out the term and/or revising So
It keeps the whole thing open. It's just bring back the policy 9110. It could be and/or revising the agenda consistent with. Oh, I guess we can add that piece because it's open meeting law. But we don't want to bring back something that's not in the open meeting law. I don't know if that needs to be in the motion, but it can be.
What I thought I heard was to address deleting items. I didn't hear and/or revising.
We can add that. I take that as a friendly amendment. And/or revising the agenda consistent with Nevada's open meeting law. Is that friendly? Who made the motion? Is that a friendly amendment you're good with, Trustee Rodriguez? It's added in.
Can we hear that motion one more time, please? I'm so sorry.
It's okay. We want to make sure it's clear. You were good. Go ahead. You're good.
The Board Policy Committee directs the superintendent to revise Board Policy 9110 to address deletion of items from the agenda.
To include addressing.
Excuse me. To address.
It should be to include addressing.
Yeah, wait a minute.
Yeah, let me help you out here, Jeannie, because I think this is important. It's board policy, okay. The Board Policy Committee directs the superintendent to make revisions to Board Policy 9110 with changes to include, so it can be more than that. That's why I think it was worded that way. If I understand that, with changes to include to include deleting items from the agenda, and then the friendly amendment is and/or revising the agenda consistent with Nevada's open meeting law.
That's the motion, and the friendly was recommended. Great catch, because it certainly didn't hurt us to have it in there. And the friendly was accepted by the motioner and the seconder. Okay?
And just for clarification again.
Yep.
It's up to the superintendent, then it's subject to debate. Nobody's saying what those deletions or revisions would be.
No, it's based upon, we've had some conversations about it. We weren't specific in the agenda item, which is why we couldn't have specific discussions. But nothing goes into effect until it comes back to the policy committee. So she can come up with something crazy if she wants to. She won't. But, I mean, the staff, right? But then we get here and say, no, we're not doing that. We're not going to not start coffee unless we all have Starbucks and cookies. Although I would be okay with that. But no, no. You wouldn't vote for that? Okay, not Starbucks. Okay, whatever. Okay, but you know what I mean? So nothing. It still needs to go through us. Goes through the same process whenever we're changing policies. The same process we're accustomed to. And it's the superintendent. She directs staff, right? So, right, and so that hopefully should clarify. Everybody clear? Okay, we did public comment. All those in favor of the motion, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposition? All right, the motion's carried. Let the record show it is unanimous. Thank you, and I apologize for leading our charge off of the agenda. Okay, closing items. We will go to public comment. We have any closing public comment?
Yes, we have public comment from Shannon Coley.
Okay. Welcome. Oh, you just get your mic on.
Thank you.
Okay, there we are.
Good afternoon. I would like to address the new textbook purchase that the Washoe County School District is going to buy with the ESSER 3 money. And I am asking that not $1 be spent on any Pearson textbooks. They contain extremely divisive examples and outright lies. One such example is a math textbook that features a bar graph labeled "Measuring Racial Prejudice by Political Identification." The graph shows that conservatives are the most racist. Remember, this is a math book, not that that example is okay in any subject. The more distressing aspect was Pearson's response. They issued no apology, but said they have a unique responsibility to being proactive in bringing social justice topics to the classroom. This is disgusting and divisive. How is this social justice? Disparaging half the country. This is not the only example of Pearson's blatant biasness and divisiveness. In a Pearson history book, it says that President Trump was not mentally stable and suggested that all who voted for him were racists. Way to divide our country. If books like this are allowed in Washoe County School District, I'm sure the backlash will be quick and loud. Pearson clearly has a political and ideological agenda that all of us want to avoid. They are biased and not neutral in any way. I am certain they are not alone in pushing this divisive ideology in textbooks. Therefore, I want the constituents of Washoe County to get a review and approval of these next textbooks. None of this is shocking. It's par for the course in public education today, and that is why people no longer trust public education.
Thank you, Ms. Coley.
James Benton.
Mr. Benton, welcome.
Good afternoon, board members. James M. Benton for the record. Please ensure my comments are entered in the public record per NRS 241.035. Please take accurate notes. I'm here to talk about truth. You shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. I oppose divisive, political, racist teachings that are taught in the Washoe County School District or will be taught. For example, white privilege. Discrimination should not be allowed or tolerated. I passed out a page from Equity 101. White privilege, unpacking the invisible knapsack. And then I add, of divisive, political, racist teachings. Discrimination should not be allowed or tolerated. Third paragraph, I think whites are carefully taught not to recognize white privilege, as males are taught not to recognize male privilege. White privilege is like an invisible, weightless knapsack with special provisions, maps, passports, etc. I am now asking that every trustee that believes this and wants it taught in the school district to please resign. Going on, after I realized the extent at which men work from a base of unacknowledged privilege, I understand that much of this oppressiveness is unconscious. This is the perfect con. What would be the level of evidence to prove that a person has this? Reasonable doubt? Preponderance of evidence? How would you prove this in court? This has a chilling effect on the accused. Does not honor relationships. You're an unconscious oppressor or victim. Where is the spirit of we are all created equal? In Britain, the abolition of slavery was a cause championed by William Wilberforce, a member of Parliament. He was soon joined by others. Other anti-slavery activists joined to help him. In the Civil War, thousands of Union soldiers fought and died. Didn't matter the color of their skin. So again, I oppose any indoctrination of this type to anyone in the school district. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Benton.
That's all the public comment.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry. You just received 2 email public comments from Joe Morabito and Richard Cleary.
Okay. Thank you, Jeannie. All right. Thank you, everybody. This concludes our policy committee meeting. Our next meeting is April 12th. April 12th, because in March we have 2 weeks of spring break. So April 12th. All right. We are adjourned. All right. Let the record show it's before 4 o'clock.